Hi everybody, welcome back to Home Life 365. I'm Misty and we are back in the kitchen today. Today I want to make a loaf of bread for this week and I want to do a different recipe today. I'm going to be doing a honey white bread. I know a lot of people try to stay away from refined sugars and this is a great alternative that just uses honey in place of the sugar. So I will bring you down to the countertop and we'll get started. What I'm going to start with today is 1 cup of warm water. I want the water to be right around 110 degrees and I want to add to this water 3 tablespoons of honey. Today I'm using a raw wildflower honey, but you can use any honey that you have that your family enjoys. And I want to just stir this right into the warm water. Whoop. If your honey's crystallized, if you soak it in warm water, it will become liquid again. That had happened to this one, so it's a little bit thick. But I do want to mix this honey into the water before I add it. So that's 3 tablespoons of honey. I'm just going to stir that right around in here. This water is between 100 and 110 degrees. You want it warm enough to activate the yeast, but if it's too hot, it can kill the yeast. So I've mixed this around, and I'm going to put this straight into the bread maker pan. I have had questions about adding the liquid and the yeast to the bread pan first. I know a lot of bread machines say to add the liquid and the yeast last, but I do it this way because if I do the liquid and the yeast first, I can see if the yeast is active. And the reason I do this is because I store yeast in my pantry and in my freezer, and it's not always the freshest. And I want to make sure that it's active before I've added all of the other ingredients. And that way, if it's not, I can get some new yeast and start over, and all I've lost is some honey and some water. So now I want to add my yeast, and I'm going to add 2 1/4 teaspoons. Or if you have it in a packet, that would be 1 packet of yeast. And I'm just using Fleischmann's Fleischmann's active dry yeast. So 2 1/4 teaspoons right into the water and honey. 2 1/4. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close the lid on my bread machine, and I will come back in about 10 minutes to make sure that my yeast is foaming and bubbling. If it's not at that point, I would dump this and I would redo the water and honey, and I would use fresher yeast. But I think this one's going to work, but I'm just to check it and be safe, I'm closing it, and I'll be back with you in about 10 minutes to make sure it's good. Okay, it's been 10 minutes and you can see that my yeast is foamy, and as soon as I lifted the lid, I could smell the yeast, so I know that it's active, I know that it's good. So we're ready to go forward with this. So the first thing I want to do is add 3 cups of bread flour into my yeast mixture. If you don't have bread flour, you can always, in any bread recipe that I've tried, you can substitute all-purpose flour for bread flour and add 1 teaspoon per cup of flour of Vital Wheat gluten. And that has worked for me. I've never had an issue with it. So I'm going to put in my 3 cups. Three cups of bread flour. Now I do want to say, if you follow a recipe like this one, where I'm putting the liquid and yeast in first, You always want to add your salt last. Salt can kill yeast. And in a lot of recipes for the bread machine, it says to put your salt and flour in first and add your liquids and yeast on top. The biggest importance is that the salt and the yeast are separated. So be sure if you're putting yeast on the bottom that salt's on the top. If salt's on the bottom, put your yeast on the top. That should solve any problems that you would have with the separation of the two. So I've added my flour. I'm going to add in 2 tablespoons of softened butter. On top of my flour, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of butter. You can use salted or unsalted, whichever you prefer. So I'm adding 1½ teaspoons of salt. You can use whatever salt you prefer. Table salt, pink Himalayan, or Redmond's real salt. Any of these should work. And that is all of our ingredients. So I just want to set my bread machine to a 1½ pound loaf, and I'm going to put it on a medium crust, and I'll be back with you when it's all done. Welcome back, everybody. It's been about 4½ hours, and our bread machine just finished up, and the loaf looks delicious. I'm just going to take it out. Still very hot. I just want to get this turned out onto a pan. That looks really good. Some of it stuck around the paddle. That'll be a bite for the cook. So I'm just going to flip this over. That's a lovely loaf. It's nice and brown on the sides. Whew, it's hot. Nice top. I'm going to try to slice into it so you can see it. I really should buy a bread knife. Whew, it's crusty on the bottom. I'll try to give you a good shot of the inside. This is a nice loaf. So again, even on the sliced part, there's a nice crust. Nice and soft, pillowy in the inside. This bread has a really great flavor. It's not sweet. You don't get a sweetness really from the honey. It's just a good flavor. I hope you'll try this recipe. Try this bread if you're trying to cut out refined sugars in your diet. And I hope you'll leave a comment below and tell us how it turns out. If you would like to see another video for bread machine with all-purpose flour and without a wheat gluten, I will link it in the cards. And I hope you come back next time.